SC Media and our sponsor, Sempris, are proud to present this month's CISO Stories podcast. Hosted by yours truly, Jessica Hoffman. This is a show where CISOs share tales from the trenches and unpack leadership lessons learned along the way. Listen to previous CISO Stories podcast episodes at CISOstoriespodcast.com. The Cyber Risk Collaborative is a unique membership community enabling cybersecurity leaders to work together in a trusted environment. To learn more, please visit CISOstoriespodcast.com/CRC. Greetings, everyone. Welcome to another episode of CISO Stories podcast. I'm your new host, Jess Hoffman, here with a man that needs no introduction, but I'm going to let him do that anyway. What's up, Todd? How you doing?
Well, good. It's great to be here, and I'm happy to have this podcast and pass the torch over to you, Jessica.
Aren't you sweet? Well, before we get into the interview, I just gotta say, the man, the myth, the legend. I am a huge fan, Todd. I have been. I'm not gonna date you or myself, but I love to tell the story of seeing you and hearing you talk and perform many years ago at CMS Sea Scout conferences. I don't remember what you were talking about exactly, but it was something about generations and how Gen X is better than baby boomers. That was a joke. But I'm really honored to be here with you today and talking with you and being able to continue your legacy here with the CISO Stories podcast. Let's get started. Today's podcast is about, the title anyway, is Todd's moving on after 185 plus episodes. Future CISO vision. That's a mouthful. So we're gonna hear from you today, Todd, about your challenges, your triumphs, everything you loved about this podcast, and what you're gonna do next. Let's go.
Okay, I guess I'm the one on the spot now.
You are.
That's not fair. That's not fair. One of the things that a lot of the guests would know, and I'm probably telling secrets here, is that in all these episodes, which has just been a fantastic experience, I don't give them questions in advance. And I know different podcast hosts will do things differently. But for me, that was always intentional because we kept it conversational. We had the topic, and when you're working with such experienced CISOs and industry leaders that I've pretty much pulled a lot of them from my network over the years, people that know stuff. You get to know a lot of people in this industry that know things. And it's like, hey, that person could record a great podcast on this topic. And so then we just get talking and we talk about what the issues are. And that's really been a lot of fun. And I think a key message here, and something that I'm really happy about with the podcast, is that we draw from the community, and we draw from all the CISOs out there, and a lot of them now are sourced from the community that's with the Cyber Risk Collaborative. Where there's over 1,200 CISOs that are participating in some way or another in different events and so forth. And people have a lot to contribute, and we can learn all of that from each other.
Active Directory is the #1 target for cybersecurity threats, and is a threat that's harder to detect and prevent than ever, because in the process of adopting, managing, and securing each unique AD environment, organizations develop separate teams using separate tools and separate silos, which means neither team can detect the threat across silos until it's too late. To combat today's cyber attacks, enterprises like yours need a way to see the whole picture beyond silos and secure their entire hybrid AD environment. Now you can with Sempris. Visit CISOstoriespodcast.com/Sempris. I love that. So I'm gonna put you on the spot right now, since you mentioned, no preconceived questions, no prep here other than us talking about, hey, you're gonna be on? Yeah, let's do this. So tell me, what was the worst guest you ever had?
The worst guest I ever had. You know what? I it, and this maybe this is just my value. I don't look at people that way, because even the person that you look at and that you've met at a conference or something, it's like, "Oh, I don't know that they really know that much stuff about security." They know something, and they've had an experience about something that will be valuable to you, and they've had a lesson or some hard knocks, things that have happened in their past that they can share with you. And if we're listening, we can all learn from that. I speak at a lot of public, or a lot of national conferences, as you know. And one of the things I tell people is that when I'm not speaking, my butt is in a seat in another session. And because I also feel that if you're sitting in any session, I don't care if you like the speaker or not, and you don't pick up at least three things that you didn't know before, then you're not listening. And that may be something new. It may be an affirmation of something that you're doing. It may be a different idea altogether. And I think we really have to give everybody that respect in the industry. We started this podcast. This it actually grew out of the CISO Compass book, which I wrote about 5 years ago. Proud to say that's been best-selling cybersecurity book for each of the last 5 years. And one of the reasons for that is two things. One, it's a structured roadmap on how to do this job as a CISO. But the other piece of it is that I also infused 75 different cybersecurity leaders and CISOs, in different perspectives on different issues into the book. And after we published the book, we thought, well, why not bring some life to this? And let's have the people that wrote those pieces actually talk about them. And so that's where the interviews started. So you'll see a lot of stories in here in the beginning that started off with little one-page, things that they contributed to the CISO Compass book, which is not just a collection of stories. I've seen those books. I didn't want to write one of those books. It's actually a very systematic approach to being the CISO, but it brought it to life, and in their own voices, and so they could go deeper onto those topics. And then after we'd exhausted all of those CISOs, then we opened it up by invitation only to a bunch of top-notch CISOs and industry leaders in the industry. Now, you asked about the worst guest. I like to think of them all as being great because they all offered something. So even the worst guests, and you wouldn't see this in the podcast, but we had a couple instances. I wouldn't say worst guests because I don't like to think of anybody like that. But we had one situation where we were trying to, get the podcast done, and the background lighting, the light was coming in through all the blinds. And so all you saw was this ray of light. So we sort of tried to fix that. And then there were microphone issues, and the microphone couldn't get working. And then there.
My episode?
No, it wasn't your episode.
All right, I was making sure. Okay.
No, it wasn't your episode. And then after that was sorted, then there was too much noise in the background with other people around, so had to go and find another room altogether. So we had to start all over again with the equipment and everything else. So all I'm saying here is, if you're going to sign up to do a podcast with somebody, do yourself that favor, and just like you would do a presentation at a conference, you wouldn't rock up 5 minutes before the presentation and start loading your new presentation from the USB key into the presentation and then see if the thing works and just hope, right? Get there 45 minutes early to your presentation, right? Oh, maybe you do that. I don't know. For me, For me, I can't operate that way, and so I try to be more prepared for that. So check out your equipment and your lighting and so forth, and make sure that you're going to be in a place where you can actually, do the interview.
Well, that's why you're number one, bestseller author, because you prepare and you take the time. So great answer to that question. As far as your worst guess, kudos. You spot on there, spot on. We learn from everybody, absolutely. Why reinvent the wheel? Listen up. There's always something, even if there's nothing, there's something. So you started this podcast 4 years ago. You just mentioned, you interviewed your guests from your book, which is awesome. Again, the last time I saw you in person was in Jacksonville, Florida, and you were hustling your book. I remember because I would have gotten one, but you were like, "Oh, go to Amazon." And I was like, "Oh, you got to have them on hand, Todd. I know they're heavy, but yes, everybody, whoever's listening to this podcast, hit up Todd. He's going to send you a signed one for free. I'm just playing. We got to
Yeah,
support each other."
don't believe everything you hear either. Okay, that's another tip.
Yeah. So tell me, as far as your experience with the podcast and writing the book, and I know that you've had so many other interactions with CISOs and just your experience period. You've been in the field a long, long time, and over those years, the role of the CISO has really, really evolved. I mean, even in my time, I'm a little over 15 years now. There weren't CISOs when I first started, maybe director of IT/security or whatnot. So, in your experience, what you've seen over the past 4 years and even before that, how has the role of CISO evolved, and where do you see that going?
So one of the things that I was very passionate about in the CISO Compass book is understanding what that history is, and so one of the first chapters is actually dedicated to the CISO evolution. And I came up with this five stage model. So if we go back to 1995, I know we talk sometimes like the CISO role is brand new. But it's actually been around since for 30 years. And Steve Katz, who is the first CISO, the late Steve Katz, and he's also on the back cover of the book, by the way, of endorsing the book, which was quite an honor. But okay, I need access. Here's the files I need. I need some user access, and that was pretty much where things stood. But he was trying to operate in an executive level and work with other executives for a large bank, and so that helped move us towards that executive level. So we have a lot to thank him for. And then we moved into this compliance era. Uh, and I've got the dates and stuff in the book that all these things happened, but like 2000 and 2004, and that's when all the laws came about, the HIPAA laws, the GLBA laws. We had the PCI standards came out, the FISMA stuff. All that stuff was coming out, and it was in the early time, and that was what really put the requirement on the table to even have a chief security officer. Somebody had to be accountable for the security within the organizations. And then once, 2004, 2008-ish, we start getting into this HIPAA, are you HIPAA compliant? And people would go through a checklist and say, yeah, I'm HIPAA compliant, but are you really secure? And so we started to move into more of a risk era. Where that's when we started to see the GRC tools and things start to come on the market, because we couldn't secure everything at the same level. So we really had to take a risk management approach. And then once we just got all the security fixed in 2008 and all the organizations were secure, okay, that's a joke.
That was
Okay, then then
I
then we
got it.
moved to that next phase, where it was the socially mobile cloud-oriented CISO. So we had all these things. So the data just kept moving further and further away from that core data center. And so, but we had to manage all these environments. And then the fifth phase is the privacy-aware CISO. And this is the privacy and data aware CISO. And this is the CISO that understands privacy and understands all the privacy laws and where the data is. That's going to be the CISO that's really important. And that's also why I drafted with a partner, Dr. Valerie Lyons, who has her PhD in information privacy and leads a cybersecurity practice in Dublin, Ireland. We co-authored the Privacy Leader Compass, which follows the same structure as the CISO Compass, but it's all oriented towards privacy. What are all those things that you need to do around privacy? And the CISO really needs to know both of those things. And privacy officers could benefit from knowing both of those things as well. So that's why we did that. And then I've added this new phase since the book was written. And I think about 2022 and forward, I'm calling it the business resilience supply chain oriented CISO. And this is where, we're really looking at those external systems. We have the, things like solar winds and so forth that have occurred. The most recent, change control, issue that we had with a major security vendor, those sorts of things really impact our systems. And so we need to really have a good grip on that. And that's been something that's been somewhat elusive. So there's really 6 stages of the CISO as we've gone forward. What's important is that each one of these phases hasn't replaced the other phase, it's added to. And that's why this job is so complex, and there's so many things that this role is expected to do. And it's why we have to reach out to, so many people to really help understand those things that we don't understand.
You said so much there. I have like a million things to say back. Probably the most important one, and I haven't said this for a while myself, is that privacy is often left out when we talk about security. And personally, I make it a point when I say security and privacy. So that's awesome. You extended that next phase to include that, because it's so important, right? Whether it's privacy of our own data, our clients' data, our citizens' data, being government, private industry, what have you. And I think that the laws nowadays, that's a whole nother podcast, right? That's a whole nother episode of what those laws look like, especially in America, let alone the world. So all of that is in your book, right? So buy your book, you get all that.
Yeah,
Plus the next version.
here it is right here. It's
Look at that.
and see, we followed the same structure. We used the 7S, which is system, style, staff, structure, skills, and shared values. And it's if you're familiar with the McKinsey model for organizational effectiveness of a business, what we did is mapped all the things we do in security and privacy to that. Because aren't we really trying to be a successful business within a business, right? If we want to achieve our strategy for security, we need to look at all these components and make sure that we have all those other pieces in place that are all important.
Absolutely. So let's go the other direction. Tell me about your over the 180, or you're in the 90s, aren't you? You're in the 90s. 100, oh, they haven't dropped yet. The 190 plus episodes that you have. What was your favorite guest, your most memorable guest, or your most memorable takeaway from the podcast session that you had with them? Let's talk about that.
I started writing some of these things down, and it's like it is a whole list. It honestly there are so many dimensions to security. I mean, starting out in the early days, like episode number 6 I did with Steve Katz, he said that our job is to make security simple for the executives. If they don't understand it, it's not their failure, it's our failure. Because they're all smart people and they expect us to be able to communicate that well. I've interviewed Tim Brown from SolarWinds with the current pending SolarWinds case. We talked about the SolarWinds breach, what happened, what they did after the breach. Very insightful podcast. And then we followed up with Joe Sullivan. And I think I was actually one of the first people to interview him after his conviction. And that was the first when we first went to video. A lot of the earlier ones were all audio, and that was the first one we went to video. And we actually extended the time frame for Joe because he had so much to say around that. I've interviewed Tomas Maldonado with the CISO for the NFL.
I'm very jelly. I am definitely having him back on. I'm just telling you that right now. You're not going to stop me, but go ahead.
Okay.
Go
I
ahead.
can't stop you. But he talked about the how the Super Bowl gets secured, and it wasn't just from the terrorist standpoint. It was also making sure that people aren't messing with the calls that go back to New York, when they replay the segments and so forth. We had Ross Leo, who some people may not know, but he ran security for the Johnson Space Control Center. And when they were putting the rockets up in the air, the encryption, there wasn't enough bandwidth to encrypt it, but they still needed to encrypt these things because you can't have hackers getting in the middle of that. Nicole Ford did a podcast around diversity and inclusion, and I've had several podcasts around that as well. Amy Bojak, the former CISO for Clorox, she talked about the importance of diversity on teams and bringing that and actually leveraging that diversity, not just having a diverse team, but actually leveraging that. Dave Eslek, the CISO for formerly Starbucks and now with Chipotle, he talked about how do we train our successors and do the right things. I brought Helen Patton on to talk about it. She's with Cisco, and Helen has written a nice book about the CISO career path. And so we talked about mid-career people that are trying to move into security and how to get the right skills. We've talked about risk with Doug Hubbard and Jack Jones on different podcasts. They've each written books. Jack Jones is The Fair Approach. Doug Hubbard wrote the book How to Manage Anything in Cybersecurity Risk. And then, Spencer Mott, who's the CISO for Bookings.com. He talked about, you sure you want this job? And so some things to think about there. Or the CISO from Yahoo, who talked about, pieces of advice when transitioning to the CISO role, and how he was very technically oriented most of his career, and he didn't pay much attention to things like GRC. But now that he was the CISO, he said, "I wish I'd have paid more attention, when I could have learned that stuff." Malcolm Harkins talks about, getting this job, but, sure, it may pay a lot, but are you willing to take on the accountability that goes with that job? And he has some very interesting views about that. We can't just say, well, I'm just the facilitator of security. No, you've got some accountability there. And then I liked Ed Amoroso, who is the former CISO for AT&T. He talked about the board and what kind of education they should have, and more importantly, who's really responsible for that. And he made a really good point. He says, when the CISO is coming to the board, they don't give you training on what income statements and balance sheets are, right? They expect you to know what that is, but we don't put that same expectation, at least some organizations, on their board members to learn more about cybersecurity, so that you can have more of those conversations. And then we've had a few podcasts that talk about the burnout in the industry. I've had Shamla Naidu, who was the CISO for several large organizations. Most recently, she was with Netscope and IBM Security, leading large programs. And she talks about burnout and has actually a different view from what Steve Shelton has around, is this real or is this not real? So not all the opinions are people that agree with each other. And then I'll just give you another one here. James Christiansen talked about getting too much budget. That's a problem that a lot of people don't seem to have these days. But he tells this story about how he went into the board and he said, here's my plan. I've got all these projects. Here's what I'd like to do over the next 3 years. And the board came back to him and said, well, I think that's great. And we're going to give you all the money, but we want it done in 1 year. And he said, it was a disaster. He said, so be careful what you ask for, because, and it was a disaster because change management, an organization can only adapt to so much change at once. And so, those are the little nuanced things about this field that you can learn from. And then recently we had Paul Neff on talking about deep fakes. And you can actually go back and watch that episode and actually see a deep fake of somebody that you might be talking to right now.
You maybe.
Just possibly.
I think I heard this one. I think I heard this one. Yes, I did. Yes, I seen it. I seen it. That is so much information that you
I know,
just
that's just kind of a mind dump.
but you just summarized like 4 years of learning. And if you're anything like me and what you said earlier, it's circular learning. We're constantly learning, regardless of experience, regardless of age, industry, whatever. We are constantly learning from others. So we're coming close to time, but I have 2 really important questions for you, Todd, before we leave here. But thank you for that, because I just resonated with everything there. Please, can I have more than I want to spend budget or need to spend budget? I literally can spend like thousands of dollars in 10 minutes. But anyway, tell us, what is next for you, Todd?
What's next?
What's
Well,
next?
Todd tries to figure that out every year. and I've got several initiatives that I'd like to focus on. I don't know when that's going to be. My passion has always been sharing information, helping the next generation, making information be available to everybody. And I think, the more that I can do that, the better off. I do board advisories. I've done mentoring with people. I've written the books, the podcasts. I do keynotes. I enjoy doing that kind of stuff. I also have other things as well in my life. I also, I go to a lot of concerts. I go to sporting events. I'm a Wisconsin Badger, Green Bay Packer fan. If you want to get on my good side,
Oh, okay.
Or maybe I just alienated the whole audience now.
Now you're safe with Green Bay. I think you're
And
safe.
I also last year, both of my children had children. So I have new grandbabies
Congratulations.
that are both under a year and a half years old. So I look forward to seeing their steps all the way. But I'm not going anywhere. I'm doing a lot of things, but I've got some more focused projects, and those will come clear in the future at some point.
I just had an epiphany. I need you to come out to Philly to do the keynote or something for B-Sides Philly. I need you. I need to see you again, Todd. We're gonna make this happen. I say I have a tall order to fill. If anybody knows you, he's very tall.
Well,
So am
as you
I.
as you know, I spend half my time living in Dublin, Ireland, half the time in the Milwaukee, Chicago area. So I love learning about different cultures and getting to see other countries and so forth, and working with other countries. And that's been the fun part about this job, is being able to speak in lots of different places. And I used to live in the Philadelphia area as well, so I know what that's like as well.
I was
Good
gonna say
cheesesteaks.
Philly isn't a different country unless you wanna. I mean, you might. Depends on what you know about Philly. So last question here is, in like 30 seconds, tell us, Todd, what would you tell your 18-year-old self right now about being successful in the future and meeting your goals in the future?
I would say, and it is that, be uncomfortable, and always be uncomfortable with what you're doing, because when you're uncomfortable, that means you're growing, that means you're learning, you're doing something more. So continuously learn, and the jobs will fall your way. Don't stress out about the jobs. Work the hardest you can, and it only makes sense when you're looking backwards as to every job you got, every job you didn't get, every promotion you got, every promotion you didn't get. It all connects together, and then it makes sense. And so don't fret so much. Just work the hardest that you can.
Solid advice, Todd. Solid advice. I can't tell you how much I am very grateful to have the opportunity to talk with you right now, the opportunity to continue this cybersecurity CISO Stories podcast that you started from your book, CISO Compass. Many great things to continue to come your way, and we'll definitely see you again soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, Jessica, and I wish you all the best, and I look forward to listening to the podcast in the future.
Thank you.
Thanks to all the listeners.
Thank you for tuning in for this week's episode of the CISO Stories podcast. We want to say a special thank you to our sponsor, Sempris. Please subscribe to the CISO Stories podcast, and you'll receive a new story each Tuesday at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We'll see you next week for a new episode. Thanks for joining.